Greetings. I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth at Emory University. Thank you for inviting me to speak at the 2021 JAINA convention, which is virtual this year. And because it is virtual, I'm told it has a record number of attendees from all over the world. My topic is sustainability or ecology and Jainism. There is not any other religion that I know that is focused on environment or on nurturing nature. Jainism is the only exception. The aim of Jainism is caring for self. How do you care for yourself? Take care of yourself physically and mentally. Caring for the community and caring for the environment. It encourages us to do three things. Self-enlightenment. It has to be based on knowledge, facts, and science, not just hearsay or rituals. There's a meaning behind. It is also self-control. Empower yourself to discipline yourself, what is right and wrong, and also self-understanding or self-realization. In fact, those three main ways to gain knowledge, to learn what the environment is all about, who we are as human beings, and how we relate to the community in which we live becomes a key foundation of Jainism. Jainism gives us three major tenets with which to practice for caring for self, caring for the community, and caring for the environment. One, of course, is the principle of ahimsa, absolute or total non-violence. In other words, have respect for all living organisms, not just human beings. There is no some such thing as humans being superior, animals being inferior, insects being more inferior, etc. Everybody is equal in the ecology of the nature, essentially. It believes very strongly on the principle of aparigraha. Possession is not good for you. Too much ownership, too much materialism is not good, which again is related to the environmental protection in many ways, as I will talk about later on. And the last thing, of course, is anekantavad. There is no one perspective that dominates. Multiple perspectives are all there in search of the ultimate truth or the ultimate belief system. So I will start my formal presentation by having the title, which is How to Reduce Global Warming, and subtitle is Nurturing Nature the Jainism Way. The timeliness of this topic is incredible. On the Earth Day in the month of April, as you know, President Biden from the United States, along with 40 other leaders, made a pledge and a commitment to somehow intervene or reduce or slow down climate change. Think about the countries who agreed, who are at odds or everything else, but this is a very key problem worldwide. It's an existential problem, essentially, and that is Russia agreeing, China agreeing, and the United States agreeing, along with other allies and partners. But these three countries are always in conflict with each other, ideological conflicts, economic conflicts, political conflicts, military conflicts. But they did agree on one common agenda, that it is in the self-interest of mankind to somehow nurture nature, reduce carbon footprint, and hopefully reduce global warming in the process. So let's go through formal presentation. Here are some observations. Global warming is real. There is no denial anymore. Not only that, but there's an overwhelming scientific as well as field observation evidence that it is an existential stress. Whether those are the glaciers in the Arctic circles, or those are the snow mountains in Himalayas, or those are the floods and rising of waters in the oceans where many countries are going to go under the water, whatever they are. But the evidence is overwhelming. There is also a growing consensus, not maybe unanimous, which is my belief system, that it is directly related to industrialization, or it is the side effect of industrialization. While from the agricultural age to the industrial age has been very beneficial to the mankind. Our life expectancy has gone up. We have more conveniences. We don't have to work as hard as in the agricultural age. The world is more comforting through electricity, internet nowadays, etc. What I'm doing is very convenient, comfortable, would have been impossible without technology. But the industrial age, like all technologies, has significant side effects, which will be the main point I will make about how Jainism can tell us how to reduce that side effect, leading into gas emissions and global warming. One major problem in the industrialization has been over-exploitation, not taking only what's necessary, but over-utilization, over-exploitation of natural resources for economic growth, but it is not sustainable as China, India, and Africa transition from the agricultural to the industrial economies. And they are destined to do it because it is in their interest to become more like advanced nations for citizens' welfare, citizens' well-being, and in the process, environment is likely to be suffering. In fact, this is the reason why you have the new millennium goals established by United Nations, which are exactly those three things I talked about: caring for self, caring for community, and caring for the environment or the planet. Jainism way of living can provide practical solutions to slow down and, in fact, I'll be as bold as to say, reverse global warming. And this is all doable. Can be done in 1 decade, as President Biden announced that in 1 decade, gas emissions, carbon emissions will be reduced by 50% through policy and intervention. I think Jainism can also tell how we can behave differently when it comes to consumption, when it comes to production, when it comes to policy, and that is what I will articulate. Sustainability, the Jainism way. So what are the principles of sustainability from a Jainism perspective? Well, the first and most important one is respect for all forms of life. No harm to any living forms of life, including plants and vegetation, animals and marine life. That says when you have a respect for life, you do not over-harvest them. You only take what is necessary to survive. Ahimsa, as I mentioned, or absolute non-violence, is one of the tripod, one of the 3 pillars of Jainism. Mindful consumption is the second one. Jainism encourages very strongly to use the Mother Nature who gives you plenty of things, but do it in a more conscious way. Do it in a more mindful way. And that means vegetarian and vegan diet for personal health, caring for self, as well as impact on the community and the planet. So to get the same 1 pound of protein, if you do it from plant-based protein as opposed to animal-based, its environmental impact is a lot lower, and in the process, nature can be still preserved or even nurtured. The third principle is, of course, and by the way, mindful consumption, one of the key activities, the traditional Jainism way would be to have an intermittent fast every day. From the sunset to the sunrise, 10 to 12 hours of pretty much complete fasting, which is again good for your personal health. So intermittent fasting, which is becoming very popular in the Western world, actually originates from the basic day-to-day living of Jainism. And third principle is mindful materialism. Too much possession will create more anxiety, more problems, more security for the individual. So limited possession of material goods, including homes, garments, jewelry, or food, shelter, and clothing, is a fundamental principle that Jainism advocates. Of course, it is known by the Jainism scriptures as aparigraha, or non-possession. Interesting, ownership has its own negative or side effects or consequences. Let's look at, therefore, what has happened to the environment and think about why it happened, which is my fundamental message about industrialization. On the next slide, you will see sources of environmental degradation. Global warming is one column, air pollution is another one, water pollution, and of course habitat alteration for land use. What nature is there, we use it for converting from natural preserve to a habitat for humans. Household operations is the largest contributor to our global warming, 35%. Household operations, which means the home and everything we do in the home, contributes toward 32% of air pollution, 21% of water pollution. Of course, habitat alteration is much lower, like 4%. Second activity which creates the global footprint of carbon emission is food. The food itself, from creating the food, whether it's animal-based or vegetation-based, is 12% for global warming contribution, 17% toward air pollution, 38% toward water pollution. In making food, we waste a lot of water. And of course, habitat alteration is 45%, because we take the nature land, like the forest or pastures, and convert them into things that will grow for human consumption or animal consumption. And a third major carbon footprint source is transport. Global warming, 32% it contributes, air pollution 28%, water pollution not as much, 7%, and about 15% for infrastructure. We take the land and make it into infrastructure like highways, railways, whatever we do, is about 15%. So if you take total percentage of global warming, 79% comes from household operations, food consumption, and transport. If you look at the columns around here, it is absolutely striking to have one observation, namely that most of the pollution is done, especially carbon footprint, global warming, is the largest source of carbon footprint is at the consumption level. It is in our hands, which is what Jainism says. Take control, empower yourself, and behave in a way so that collectively you will make a difference. I was amazed about these numbers. While we talk about the factory, we talked about everything else on the supply side. It is really a lot more on the consumption side. And I wrote an academic paper called Mindful Consumption in terms of caring for self. What do you do? In terms of caring for the community in which you live, and of course caring for the environment. Why is this case? What went wrong? This was not the case before industrialization. The biggest consequence of industrial revolution was the separation of production from consumption. In the agricultural age, we consumed and we produced at the same time and the same place. You could not keep things more than 24 hours. There was no refrigeration. Because of that, there was no carbon footprint in producing things or in transport or in storage. The separation of production from consumption created significant carbon footprint in production, because now we went for large scale production, major factories who will produce more things for consumption, whether those are food, shelter, clothing, or appliances or anything else that they cannot consume in the locality, so you have to ship it out, export it out, whatever you do. So it is in production, storage, you have to keep storing it in warehouses, etc., transportation, shipping from point A to point B, and ultimately consumption. By the refrigeration at home creates a significant carbon footprint. The next place where we refrigerate and keep foods is in the supermarket. If you just go to the supermarket, you will see how many aisles are all refrigerator, freezer versus refrigeration, whatever it is, and how much carbon footprint it makes. And there are thousands and thousands of stores, of supermarkets, convenience stores near where we live. So the largest is the home itself. It's not only home, but the refrigerator is at home. Second largest is the supermarkets and convenience stores where food is stored for somebody to buy and to consume. We assume that nature is passive. The third major mistake we made in the Industrial Revolution was we assumed that nature is passive and inorganic, because we extracted mostly industrial raw materials like iron, coal, copper, etc. People don't realize, or did not realize at that time, that all of these are originally biological. They're organic. But we presume they're inorganic because it takes thousands of years to convert the organism into a coal or into a copper or whatever the mineral are out there as raw materials, without regard to its impact on the environment. And I think we've just simply ignored, or did not even know at that time as a knowledge 150, 200 years ago when we started the industrialization of the world. That belief system, I think, is coming to haunt us now. There was another belief system, and hopefully we will remove that belief system under the social justice activity right now. But we believe somehow that human species is superior to all other species. All other species are here to serve human beings. In other words, there's a hierarchy of species, and then therefore we can exploit them, we can abuse them, and I think that belief system is coming to roost now, or reckoning is taking place. Jainism does not believe in that. It believes the life of a smallest insect is as valuable, as precious in the ecology as the life of a human being. There is no hierarchy of species. They are all egalitarian. They are equally relevant, equally interdependent to create the ecosystem or the ecology for the world. So what can we do? Going back to the past. Is it possible in an industrial age or a service economy and the digital age, is it possible to go back the way we behaved, the way we lived in the agricultural age? So first of all, nature is biological, living, breathing, and regenerative. It will produce enough. There's a complex ecosystem with self-governance. You just have to admire when the spring comes, the flowers come, all trees have leaves. And I live in Atlanta, where suddenly you see in 2 weeks from barren branches of the trees, nothing but greenery. It's just amazing. Nature is very regenerative. It is living, breathing organism just like we are. There's a complex ecosystem with self-governance. It governs by itself. There is no intervention by anybody else unless we intervene for our own selfish reasons. Working with nature, therefore, is more sustainable model than exploiting it. We don't have to exploit it because nature produces enough to sustain human beings if we do not exploit it or overconsume it or overuse it by and large. Like all living biological organisms, which is fundamental true, nature is capable of passive resistance, non-cooperation, if abused. We have seen this in human beings. We have seen this in animals. We have seen this, in fact, in other living organisms. We see now same thing about the bees, for example, the corals in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, or any other place in Hawaii, or wherever they are. They become passively resistant. They don't want to cooperate with you because you are abusing them, which is another principle to say total non-violence. Every species has a purpose in life in this society, and we need to respect no harm to any living organisms. Why nurturing nature is absolutely critical. Not only because of the existential threat that we talked about, but it can literally assure sustainable global growth. In other words, it's always a dilemma between growth and nature or environment. It is possible to have not either or, but an end model where I can have a global growth, which we need, but at the same time sustain the environment if we do it right. We can even reverse the side effects of industrialization, as I mentioned, and I'll suggest certain ways to do it. And surprisingly, the more you invest in conservation, ecology, more you invest in reducing the gas emissions, for example, there's a better return on investment. There are funds after funds now called ESG capital, environmental, societal, and governance, which are performing in the stock market better than the average stock market, which includes Silicon Valley stocks. So they're performing even better than that, which means, again, there is no debate between economic well-being and environmental well-being. I can financially do better by serving the nature properly, by treating nature with respect. And the last one is that if you follow the tenets of Jainism through an ecological lens, we will enhance healthy living. All of us have more chronic diseases because we have a sedentary life. We don't follow the typical tenets of fasting regularly, eating at dinner time in the sunset, just before sunset, not eating, or in between, like Ayurveda recommends, between meals not eating, snacking, anything. All of this is meant to preserve our health, both emotional health, psychological health, as well as the physical health. Nurturing nature is not just a nice thing to do, I believe it is a necessity. So how do we nurture nature? And who are the actors who will do it? There are three actors involved in anything we consume. One are the producers themselves, other are the consumers, and a third one are the policymakers. So in the next chart, I've identified three specific things that production or manufacturing people can do, three specific things that policymakers like the governments can do, and three specific things that the consumers, we as average citizens, can do. Ultimately, it is all about us at the consumption level, which drives the policymakers as well as the production entities. So what are those things? Production-wise, there are one very important message that comes about is that one has to increase biodiversity. Nature has its own immunization system if you increase the biodiversity. Unfortunately, for the sake of efficiency, scale efficiency, economies of scale, we have reduced biodiversity enormously across crops. For example, in corn, in my research, many years ago, about 40 years ago, in America we had 2,500 species of corn, but because some corn performs better than the other, or hybrid seeds that we create for more yielding corns, it is now down to about 25 species, which is a major problem because any one disease, mass disease, can wipe out the whole thing. It's called blight. And we do see blight happening more and more from one crop to the other. Susceptibility increases because we have reduced, with intervention, the biodiversity. It is absolutely critical to protect wildlife. They contribute things to the society. Whether it's a wildlife in America, or wildlife in Brazil, wildlife in Australia, or wildlife in India, wildlife is everywhere, and the governments have to take a stand, and the manufacturers and the producers have to take a stand that they will not cross certain boundary lines beyond which harvesting nature is more harmful than beneficial to them, not just to the society. Second major recommendation, which is based upon that separation or divorce of production from consumption, is localized production. It's very doable today. We already know in manufacturing mass customization. We know how to produce economies of scale at smaller and smaller units. This is what was called the Toyota way, 4 principles of just-in-time, cycle time, quality assurance, and mass customization. One can use that now, new knowledge we have from the industrial age, to go back and produce things accordingly. And now, fortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to distribute supply chain rather than concentrate in one place, which creates a footprint. Then the transport and the storage creates the footprint till consumption takes place. This will be more producing factories or having production at the place of consumption as much as possible, or very near the place of consumption. Community farms are growing, surprisingly. People are very interested in creating community farms where the government gives a little plot of land and the community grows their own food, etc. I think is possible. And as I mentioned, just-in-time production and consumption is today possible with economies of scale. The third area that producers can do is a shift to renewable resources. Not just as a mandate from the government, but it is in the self-interest of the producers. We do provide the carbon footprint incentives, trading of those carbon dollars in many ways. That's not enough. I think as companies, utility companies, power generations, etc., can shift from the thermal energy to non-thermal energy, oil and gas being relegated more and more, or coal being relegated to more and more solar, wind, and other technologies which are available today and affordable, surprisingly, it's very possible. So alternate energy becomes the driver, which I think most governments are very willing to invest, give incentives, and most enterprises are very willing to experiment and make it a success or a reality. I'm very strong belief in biomass and recycling. There's an enormous energy left behind in terms of biomass, the waste from the forestry, and many of the things that we consume, and the recycling of that one. So those are the 3 recommendations for actually producers. Policy-wise, there are 3 recommendations also. What the governments can do is to educate, to increase the awareness of the imminent climate change danger to the human beings or to nature in general, all species. It can be basically in primary and secondary education. Just as we teach them 3 R's of learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, we need to teach them basically the principles of conservation, ecology, etc. Earlier you teach, the more it remains in the embedded memory of the child. As he or she grows adult, they begin to propagate the same way. So this is not at college level, but should be at the primary and the secondary education system, just as we do more intervention through literacy. Second one is, of course, social media awareness campaigns. Not done by companies or by consumers, but by the government, having hopefully fact-based, science-based, as we do with coronavirus right now, education and awareness. Second thing governments can do is offer economic disincentives and incentives. Incentives for consumption generally, because consumers will react to whatever savings they can make or whatever incentives you give, like all electric homes at one time, or putting solar panels. And on the other hand, on the production side, disincentives. I found surprisingly disincentives, some sort of a liability or some sort of an economic negative outcome, works better on the production side, and incentives work better on the consumption side. And governments are very capable of doing that on a universal basis, global basis, or local basis. Implement mandatory rules and regulations. There are many of the social issues where neither the producers nor the consumers will be able to do anyway. There is a market failure, as we call it in economics and in business. Actually, however, government can make it mandatory and create a mandatory consumption and therefore production. For example, smoke-free public places. We are not allowed to smoke in office buildings, on the airplanes, in the airports, or many places, all public places. And we obey accordingly. We have almost an environmental protection agency, EPA, very tough on making sure that the producers do not pollute, whether it's agricultural chemicals or it's basically gas stations and all of the oil that's shipping, because it is damaging to the environment. That can be done. We already have fuel efficient standards on automobiles. So the producers of automobiles and the consumers both have their self-interest to buy more fuel efficient cars, majority of the segment, and you mandate it so that fuel inefficient cars are not even allowed to be produced in the marketplace. And of course, carbon neutral infrastructure. How can you incentivize, or how can you make it mandatory in this case, so that every factory is carbon neutral, every business office, every shopping center is carbon neutral by law? There is a certain timeline you give, but I do believe that in many cases there is a market failure in social change, and therefore you have to have a mandatory rules and regulations, as we have with seat belts, for example. Safety products are always mandated. It is in the self-interest of the consumers, but they don't want to do it. It is in the self-interest of the producers to create a market. Government mandates that thing, so it can be done. And the last area, of course, is how do we nurture nature through consumption? Consumers. First of all, enhance self-awareness. We don't know as much about how body works. We have no idea about the biology and very complex system that is created from birth. Health, wealth, and happiness are the three things we always talk about for all human beings. And no matter what faith you belong to, but it is a very strong emphasis in Jainism. That's the only religion that talks about, through self-discipline, fasting, other techniques, drinking water in a certain way, all of the rituals, as we call them, or regimens that they put in, are designed for self-protection. We are the worst enemy of ourselves because we don't care for us as much. And therefore, how do we increase the self-awareness? I don't know whether you know, but the largest growth is no longer communicable diseases like the COVID-19 pandemic, but non-communicable diseases. And that is lung disease, heart disease, arthritis, for example, and now they've added mental disease. Five, forgetting the fifth one, but these chronic diseases are massively growing with the aging of the population, but they're coming at a lower and lower. Diabetes is one more, lower and lower at the lower and lower ages. And so I think it's very important. Community engagement. We can engage ourselves in community to we understand welfare of others, have an empathy dimension. And the last one is giving back, which we again strongly encourage. Volunteerism, time, talent, and treasure. So it is really the congregation that runs Jain centers or Jain gatherings. It is the congregation collectively, like a cooperative or a commune system, however you call it, that is involved. So enhance self-awareness and engage yourself. Second one is practice mindful consumption, as I mentioned earlier. The three principles of mindful consumption are reduce consumption, as we talked about, recycle, and reuse. Now in India, we do it out of necessity because we have a shortage of scarcity of resources. So we repackage any bottle that comes in and use it for different purposes. We used to do newspapers at one time, which my memory when I grew up in India. But whatever it is, reduce, recycle, reuse is a significant contribution we can make as individual consumers and collectively make a difference in the landfill area, whatever the side consequences of overconsumption are. And the last one, of course, is use social groups for support. We have the Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram. They're all 2 billion plus social media. We can create a community which encourages, educates, makes aware about how, as we can do mindful consumption and how we can nurture nature. And organize a volunteer movement even, which we are doing it. There's a whole vegan movement in the process. There's a Western culture movement primarily about plant-based diet as opposed to animal-based diets. There are many, many things happening. In fact, just as last 2 centuries we saw the westernization of the world, now you see for the first time easternization of the world. Beginning with spirituality, but yoga, there's an International Yoga Day practiced by everybody. Meditation is as mainstream in the Western culture as it is in the Indian daily living. Pranayam, deep breathing exercises, is becoming very mainstream all over the world. So one can create a common cause for caring for self, caring for community, and caring for the environment in our personal conduct and personal behavior. So let me conclude. Nurturing nature is a necessity to achieve sustainable growth. We need growth, but we also need sustainability, and how do we put together? Rise of the new middle class. In India, everything is now from unbranded consumption or made it at home. We are buying commercially all branded products, whether it's a rice, atta, whatever it is. We don't make pickles and papad anymore at home. Actually, nowadays we are outsourcing so much that I think outsourcing has come home. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, all the stuff. So as we commercialize that, there's a consciousness by the middle class of buying branded products. And of course, in the e-commerce era, you need a branded product to sell. So when the large size of the emerging economies of China, which is already a middle-income country, India, which is why China is the largest air pollution footprint right now, India is the second largest, and of course the whole of Africa is rising now. That's about 1 billion population now, again, if you put the whole continent of Africa, both sub-Sahara and above Sahara. They will put enormous pressures on world's natural resources. In fact, in one of my books, Sustainability Edge, there is no way you can have natural resources unless we nurture them properly, renew them properly to support the increasing population which is modernizing. It will require 2.5 times the Earth as a planet today, then only it can be sustained. So we are saying that given that it is inevitable the underdeveloped or emerging economies will become more advanced through modernization, industrialization, etc., we need to do the other side. How do you make it sustainable? There is enough scientific evidence that the side effects of industrialization, such as global warming, are inconvenient truths. Mindful interventions to nurture nature can reverse global warming. I'm very confident that not only can it slow down, but it can reverse also. Nurturing nature will also generate positive returns to business, to consumers, and to society at large. If you put an economic lens, it is very possible that consumers will save money, society will not be harmed as much, and the business return on assets will be better. Uncanny, but it's true. The 3 tenets of Jainism: respect for all forms of life, or ahimsa, mindful consumption, and mindful materialism, or parigraha, are all designed to coexist with nature. Thank you very much.